Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
Thursday evenings were usually a bit crazy, particularly on the second Thursday of each month, when my Tech Vision Club met from 7 p.m. until whenever. Emma and I didn't get home until 5 and 5:30, respectively. I didn't have to worry about supper since Tech Vision was a dinner meeting, but Emma, my wife of 5 years, usually wanted something done before I left. The underlying issue was my fault. Emma said she was 2 months pregnant and her emotions were out of control. She may have had a kid, but she was still the dreamboat I married. Now, with the warmth of motherhood on her, it was doubly difficult for me to leave her, even for one evening. I liked her for a lot more than her looks. She was witty, clever, and extremely attentive, but her appearance didn't hurt. She was 54 tall, weighed 120 pounds, had light brown hair, and gorgeous green eyes. Anyway, I had to leave by 6:10 to get to the meeting on time, so I had to run through the shower, dress, kiss my wife, and get back in the car to head out. I wasn't usually home until after 10:30, and often it was after 11:45 p.m. The meeting tonight didn't look to be any different. After the shower, I threw on slacks and a polo shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and headed through the kitchen to the garage. I kissed her on the back of the neck and gave her a squeeze to keep her from falling. She always wobbled when I kissed her on the neck like that, so I had to steady her. Then, out the door into the garage with a quick glance back at Emma. It was tempting to skip the meeting, not only for Emma but because I had a project in the works in the garage. I was just finishing the installation of a baby monitor for what was going to be the nursery, and I figured maybe 30 minutes, and it would be ready to show off to my bride. She was always so appreciative of my small accomplishments, and I felt no qualms about milking for the compliments. However misdirected, I was a guy after all, and didn't mind having my woman stroke my ego. I backed out of the garage and down the driveway to the street, waving to Emma at the kitchen window, where she was doing the dishes. As I climbed into the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the engine. I set my briefcase on the seat next to me and checked that I had everything I needed: cell phone, calculator, notebook, all were there. Emma waved back as I reached the street. Before I could even put the car in gear or close the door, "Hello. Alex, this is James. I'm glad I caught you. The meeting tonight is cancelled. Our wonderful president, Charles, has been summoned out of town, as have Scott and Michael, so with the president, treasurer, and secretary all gone, we decided to cancel this month. There is nothing planned for tonight unless you have anything urgent." I sat in the car for a few minutes before finally lowering the garage door. I was relieved to have the night off, and I noticed Emma's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 4-bedroom colonial. She had missed that I hadn't left, so I could surprise her later on. Everything concerning the camera and the baby's room to be was done except for some connections in the garage and final testing. The cosmetics in the nursery were pretty minor. The camera was mounted in a corner and was so small Emma hadn't yet noticed it, even though it had been mounted for 10 days now. I'd get those done another time. Emma had casually mentioned how much a monitor in the nursery would save her steps when checking on the baby while it was napping, hence my wiring the house. I decided to set up sound monitors in each of the rooms in the house while I was at it. The visual monitor in the baby's room had been an inspiration when I'd seen some gear a friend was tossing out. The master controls were in our bedroom, but since I spent a fair amount of time in my garage workshop, I had a second master in a corner of the garage, complete with speakers and an old TV subbing as the video monitor. It was flexible enough that the nursery could be monitored from any place in the house. As I mentioned, the whole thing was about complete, with just a little tune-up needed before I could show Emma and surprise her. I decided to see if I could get the work done before I came in and collapsed in front of the TV for the night, or maybe collapsed on Emma for the night, which sounded even better. So, I slipped out of my car and began checking my work. It took me about 20 minutes before everything seemed to be warm and working properly. I was in the middle of my wiring checks when I heard someone in the living room speaker, which sounded like Emma was on the phone. I cranked up the volume to test how it worked, and it was perfect, beautifully clear. The $40 ID paid on the 5 speakers was a great deal. "Mark, this is Emma. If you can get here by 7, it's on, lover," my wife said over the speaker. "Okay, sweetie, I will see you then. Don't be late. We won't have enough time as it is, and don't expect a repetition." After a little pause, Emma laughed and hung up the phone. What the hell was that about? Who is Mark? Well, the only Mark I knew was Mark Martin. His wife, Natalie, and Emma had been roommates in college. Natalie was still Emma's best friend, and Mark and I hit it off pretty well too. He was a big guy and a lot of fun. I guess he and Emma had a few dates before Natalie and he hooked up. We spent a lot of evenings together and had enjoyed many a picnic. The two girls were pretty close. Emma had told me they'd done some crazy things together in college. She had calmed me down when she gave me a kiss and told me they hadn't done anything I should be worried about. I kind of shrugged my shoulders, figuring Emma and Mark were planning something for Natalie. I'd find out at 7 anyway, which was only 15 minutes away. Giving up the speculation, I flipped the on button for the camera in the baby's room and sat back with a smile on my face. The monitor showed the room clearly. Actually, we still had it set up as a spare bedroom, and the monitor was focused directly on the big queen-sized bed. I was surprised to see the bed made up and the sheets turned down. It was the first time I'd seen Emma make it up when we weren't expecting guests. After checking the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out until I could see everything in the room except the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. I left it there at that setting and critically examined the picture. The door, window, and closet were visible, and the bed, of course, was centered in the shot. Leaving the controls as they were, I began cleaning up my workbench, feeling pretty good about myself. I had just finished my drink and was going to order some pizza when I heard the front doorbell. Emma opened the door and greeted the guest. "Hey, I've had a difficult time waiting. Come in, Mark. We have till 10:30, and then it's done, but until then, I'm yours completely." I was stunned, not by the words, but by the way my wife's voice sounded. I'd only heard that husky timbre in her voice in our bedroom or on our way to the bedroom, and it was her do-me baby voice. I choked on the last mouthful of beer and sat bolt upright in the speaker. I heard the front door close, then Emma's voice again. "Damn, Mark, from the look and feel of this bulge in your pants, I'm not the only one who had a hard time waiting. It looks pretty wonderful. Come here, honey." I heard Mark say, "Give me a real hello." There were many minutes of nearly perfect quiet, with just a few grunts and sighs, until Mark remarked, "Come on back to our room. I've got everything lined up for us." Emma and I were in love, and I was sure she had been as faithful to me as I had been to her. Emma was taking him back to our bedroom, which made me feel sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do, and my first thought was to burst through the door into the kitchen and throw Mark out of the house. I was just sitting there in the ratty old lounger when my eye caught movement on the monitor in the baby's room. The door opened, and Emma gently pushed Mark into the room with the made-up bed. She pushed him around to the other side of the bed, between the bed and the window. Then she swayed back around to stand on the other side, in front of the closed closet doors. She was looking across the bed at Mark and almost directly into the camera. Emma was dressed in her worn-out, ratty old Saturday robe, which reached just to mid-thigh. Her hair, however, was pulled up into a sophisticated bun at the top of her head, emphasizing the slender column of her throat. She had applied makeup just the right amount. She looked like a princess receiving her prince, except for the ratty old robe and her feet. She was wearing the pair of high-heeled slippers I had bought her for her birthday 2 months ago. She had worn them that evening, and I had told her how they emphasized her magnificent legs. But I didn't remember her wearing them out of her clothes since then. My wife stood tall and proud across the bed from one of my best friends, looking directly into his eyes. Her hand slowly came up to the throat of the robe, with her left hand holding the robe closed at the neckline. She used her right hand to unsnap each button, slowly working her way down. When each fastener she stood for a moment, allowing me to admire the vision framed by the robe, then she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders to let the robe fall and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I had gifted her on Valentine's Day, and I had not seen it since. Still looking into Mark's eyes, she held up a hand and crooked a finger at him, ordering him to come to her. When he turned to come around, they both undressed, and I awoke from my depression. I hurried into the now deserted living room, making as little noise as possible, and quickly grabbed a fresh SD card. I took it back to the garage, hooked it up to the monitor, and turned everything back on. The monitor came alive, showing Mark and my wife, and I almost cried through the tears. "Mark, unless you want Ethan to walk in on us, you have to go now," Emma said him. When Emma walked back into the living room, Mark was already there, and with the lilt in her voice, she handed him his clothes and gathered the rest of the lingerie she had given him along with herself and placed it on the dresser. I watched as Emma threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Mark to finish dressing. She bundled them up and took them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and the garage. "Hi, gorgeous woman. That was fantastic. We really need to discuss about doing it again." "No, Mark," Emma said. "I meant it when I said only once, and only because of our agreement. And, I suppose, for nostalgic reasons as well. Mark said, "Sure, honey. I understand. However, you may sometimes come to think about us." I agree that this was just a one-time occurrence. But if you start thinking about how fantastic it was, maybe we can try again. I was sick to my stomach as I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom on the monitor. It was 10:37, and they had stayed. I could hear my wife's impatience and the little sound she was making, but it didn't register at the time, nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Ethan is my spouse, lover, and the guy I want in my life. I don't know why we did it now. Besides, Natalie could be okay with this, but she's my best friend. She is more essential to me than an affair. Isn't she also important to you? I couldn't understand Mark's mumble, but I heard another kiss and then heard the door close quietly, and almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion in Mark's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny, but it didn't seem funny at the time. Emma reappeared in the spare bedroom after the door shut, and I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room carefully, making sure nothing was amiss after the tryst. Gathering her clothes, she disappeared into the hall, and I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 10:30. I awoke after 11:45 p.m. and turned off the electronics. I entered the house through the garage door and went directly to the master bedroom, passing the spare room where my wife had rendezvoused with Mark. The room was just as I had last seen it Wednesday night, with the bed stripped and nothing out of place. I groaned to myself as I entered my bedroom, glancing at my sleeping. When I climbed into bed, Emma rolled over and threw an arm over me. She sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually, she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though listening to her breathing, I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her and then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work. Telling me, I think I had the flu, I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched Emma's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag under some sweaters, was the lingerie Mark had enjoyed. I pulled it out, noting the crotch of the ruined panties was still damp. After calling my boss and begging off work for the day, I watched the tape I'd made the night before. At first, I just skipped through it, not wanting to relive the experience again, but after a while, I began noticing things I'd missed the night before. I spent the rest of the morning studying the video and what it contained, making 2 copies and making 2 calls. When I got home, I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. Emma arrived home at 4:30 p.m., and when she came in to give me a kiss, I turned my head, and she kissed my cheek, giving me a funny look. Finally, around 5:30 p.m., I realized there was no use in putting this off any longer. I was just making myself more furious. "Emma, I'd want to show you what I've been creating for the baby monitor we were discussing. Have you got a few minutes?" I asked. "Alex, could you please wait until after dinner?" "I'm just about to put it on," she replied. I picked up my cell phone and asked her what she wanted to eat tonight. She smiled at me and suggested Chinese, so I ordered it delivered, then took her into the bedroom and showed her how the controls worked on the console in the corner behind the door. I turned on the sound and left her there while I went from room to room, talking to her over the monitor from each room. Of course, she couldn't answer me, but when turning on the film, I instructed her to stay and watch for a while before leaving her in the bedroom and going into the spare room to stand where she had stood the night before. Their eyes met and a slow bump and grind started before I returned to our bedroom. "Alex, it is fantastic. When did you get this started?" she asked. "This afternoon, Emma. I got it going last night," I said. She had a bewildered little grin on her face, and I could see she was trying to figure out when I had the opportunity to do it. "Just like last night, Emma, I have one more item to show you." I grabbed her hand and brought her into the garage. "I spent a lot of time here, and I thought it would be a good idea to establish a monitoring station here to look after the infant while you go out." I then switched on the system in the garage. I added one item last night. "Let me show you how it works," I said, inserting the USB disc into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her, watching the monitor. Of course, we saw the same view as from our bedroom, the view I had first seen last night of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show Emma on her knees before Mark. Glancing at her face, I saw the color had drained from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Emma's tears streaming down her cheeks, as well as a little flinch as she remembered Mark's hard driving into her. I paused the movie and asked if she wanted to watch more. My wife merely stared hopelessly at me. "Emma, come in the house immediately." "I think we have a lot to talk about," I remarked as I led her into the kitchen, seated her at the kitchen table, and then sat down at the end of the table next to her. "I can explain," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That's what I need, an explanation," I said. "What is it?" "Alex, this goes back to college and a promise I made one night to Mark," she continued. "Emma, how many years ago did you promise him yourself?" I asked. "No, Alex. It was not like that. We were both inebriated. Mark and I had been dating. He and I were in a relationship. He was a hottie, and I admired him for a time. I wasn't sure if he was the one everyone believed we were, but I didn't want to commit. He never pressed us to get intimate, despite his reputation as a woman killer. I started rooming with Natalie, and they began dating for a time. He was going out with both of us, but I believed Natalie and he ended up in bed shortly after he began taking her out. Nothing significant for Mark and myself, but Natalie and he were on their way to where they are now. Mark had an intriguing reputation among the co-eds. Until I came along, there was a lot of rivalry for a one-night stand with him, and he was said to be really remarkable in bed. I wasn't a virgin, as I told you, but I was quite selective about giving out my favors. Mark and I were sitting in my room one night, sipping a few beers as we waited for Natalie to return from whatever she was doing. We began conversing, and as we drank, we both became more risque. Somehow, during our talk, I informed Mark that the main reason he and I hadn't been sexual was my fear of being pregnant. That wasn't the only reason, but it was something I could offer him. He used to turn me on fairly strongly. Mark became renowned for not wearing a condom. He expected his partners to be on the pill. I'm not sure how I did it, but I told him that if he couldn't make me pregnant, he could have me. He scoffed at me and said something like, "Yeah, sure." Anyway, we got into an argument, and after a time, I took out a piece of paper and made a promissory note. I told him that if I was certain he couldn't make me pregnant, I'd spend the evening in bed with him. When she halted, all I could do was stare at her in surprise. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 7 years," was her response. Emma went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Mark and her. Ever since then, they'd broken the news of her pregnancy to Mark and Natalie 2 weeks ago. After the initial congratulations, Mark and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Natalie had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. Emma had been shocked that Natalie even knew about it, and stunned to discover that Natalie was taking it seriously. When Mark and I came in, I remembered a case of beer I had been going to bring to a cookout. Insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special, I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Natalie had raised the topic of the note again. Emma was surprised again to find that Mark had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear Emma was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. Emma had found herself agreeing to honor the old note before I returned. It had been decided between the 3 of them that she would entertain Mark last night. "Emma, that's one of the oddest things I've ever heard, and it's incredibly hard for me to understand," I remarked. "I have a question, who is the father of the kid you're carrying?" Emma shrank, and tears started to pour down her face again. "How many additional notes are still due, and how many have you paid up?" was my next query. Emma yelled at me, "None, Alex, don't you love me? This occurred just once. It cannot happen again. Please, Alex, listen to me." It seems silly to describe it to you, but I felt compelled. It was not anything I had planned or wanted to do. Never have I been disloyal to you. Please, trust me. She collapsed into her knees, weeping and hiding her face with her hands. "Emma, please let me ask you some questions." "Will you be honest with me?" I asked. "Yes, Alex, please ask me." I'll tell you that this was a one-time event and not something I wanted to do. My doing it seemed absurd to me today, but you are more valuable to me than life. I stared down at where she knelt before me, my heart breaking and my stomach wrenching. This was my closest friend, the person I wanted by my side for the rest of my life, but I needed to know whether she was who I thought she was. Emma, could you have said no to this? I asked. Yes, I could have, but I was concerned about my honor. I was hesitant to tell you because I feared you would not understand. But I believed that if you were in my position, you would do the same thing. I was intoxicated when we made the pact, but when I got sober, I didn't throw it away. I did not know you at the time it was produced. I did not cheat on you. It was something I promised to a good friend at the time, and it seemed appropriate in that setting. Once a minute of reflection, I said, so you could have said no after you sobered up, but you felt it was right, something you owed your friend at the time. And even after all these years, you felt you owed something to the guy your former buddy had become. Is that correct? Yes, she said. Think carefully, Emma. Was this something you looked forward to? I asked. No, she exclaimed. After a time, I started to suspect it wasn't genuine after all, but rather a prank. But it was not a joke, it was true. Looking intently into her eyes, I said, what about the last 2 weeks? Did you look forward to this? Emma took a big breath and said, no, sweetie. I wasn't. It was something I felt I needed to accomplish. It was a duty, not a joy. I just kept looking at her. Emma glanced down at the table and murmured, okay, Alex, I suppose I was looking forward to it, but not the way you think. I've never thought of cheating on you. I never intended to do that, but it just happened. I felt compelled to go through with it, and if I did, there was no reason I shouldn't enjoy it. I never felt compelled to do it because you weren't enough for me. It was something I had to respect, so I figured I may as well make it memorable since nothing like it would ever happen again. I took a deep, quivering breath and let it out gently. Emma, about 6 weeks ago, I called you on my cell phone while driving home from that conference. Remember? We joked for a few minutes before I asked if you wanted to meet me at the Holiday Inn in Carterville. I invited you to come, and we could spend a weekend away from home, maybe do some hanky-panky. I believe I genuinely used those words. Do you remember? Sure, Alex, it was a great weekend as well, she said with a tremulous grin. Would you want to make it a wonderful weekend for us? I asked. For me? I asked again. Of course I did, it was. We had a great time, she said with a genuine grin. Do you recall what you brought for the weekend? I asked. Oh, not really. I grabbed a gorgeous outfit in case we wanted to go dancing, which we did, plus some comfy clothing to stroll in, she answered. Just a minute, Alex. I need to turn on the video again so you can comprehend what this inquiry is about. I turned and walked back toward the bedroom. I turned halfway down the hall to make sure she was following me, and she was. I turned on the bedroom TV and hit play on the remote, and it opened with me still kneeling before Mark. She stood up and turned to the bed, which had her standing directly into the camera in the corner, which was filming her shame. What in the world are you wearing there, Emma? I asked. She flushed and said, my white lingerie. Yes, wife, I received the set on Valentine's Day. Do you know you've never worn it for me, except for modeling it when I gave it to you? Well, sure, Alex, but there's been no place to do so, she said abruptly, perplexed. Well, you definitely didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn, I responded, but I would have remembered. As I remember, you had gone home and changed into a peasant skirt and a white shirt that buttoned at the neck. When you finally took them off, after dinner, we decided to go dancing, and you were wearing the white cotton panties and the bra I believe you are wearing today. Do you recall what you wore to bed the night we got back from dancing? In a low voice, she said, my Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking her in the eyes, I said, Emma, you just told me the Holiday Inn weekend was amazing, but the date with Mark was not. Nonetheless, you wore the sexiest item you possess, which I purchased for us to share, for Mark but not for me. What does it convey to you? What is it saying to me? How exceptional do you believe you've placed me? Emma only glanced at me, her shoulders dropping slightly. Honey, I said, if I didn't love you, we wouldn't be living here together. If I didn't believe you were significant to me, I wouldn't marry you. But I receive an unexpected phone call that cancels my appointment last night, and I sink into one of the worst nightmares I could imagine. Mark, one of my closest friends, if not my best buddy, arrives when I should have been at my meeting. My lady meets him at the door. She brings him back to a room she has gone to great lengths to prepare for a tryst, and then strips him thoroughly. And I realize she has dressed her body to show off something she hasn't done for me in over a year. When I question her about it, she claims the meeting was essential to her, but she went to great lengths to dress, put up her hair, and apply makeup, things she hasn't done for me since Hector was a puppy. That tells me the meeting was highly significant to her. She saw it as a reward that she needed to prepare for. It also indicates that her time with me was fairly average and of little significance. She wanted to cure the man, my friend, but she had no intention of treating me, her spouse, or partner. I witnessed you doing things for Mark that you only do for me on exceptional occasions, if at all, as well as doing things for him that you have refused to do for me. My wife blinked tears from her eyes. Alex, it was not that way. It really wasn't. I adore you. You are special to me. What can I do to persuade you? Emma implored. I sat on the bed and just gazed at her. I don't know yet, Emma. I'm not sure what we can do, but I'm phoning Mark and Natalie and inviting them to come over tonight. According to what you indicated, Natalie is already aware of what was going on. I gave her a longer look. Do you know whether Mark and Natalie had anything else in mind when this was put up? Emma shook her head no. I dialed their number and asked if they could come over for a few minutes this evening. While I was talking, Emma answered the door and collected the Chinese food we had ordered. Neither of us were hungry, but I forced myself to eat. I knew this was going to be a long night, and the emotions had only begun. When the doorbell rang around 7:15 p.m., I told Emma, I believe there's more to this than you understood. When I opened the door to let Mark and Natalie in, they both gave me a smile, but I don't think it was my imagination that each of them gave Emma a little special smile, especially Mark's look as I sat them down on the couch and asked Emma to join them, pointing to the couch beside Natalie. Emma chose to sit in her recliner to the side of the couch Natalie was sitting on. I kind of hemmed and hawed for a bit, making small talk about several things, but I included the new monitoring system I had been working on. I didn't tell them it was working or what it had shown me last night. Natalie and Mark were looking puzzled, wondering why I had asked I gave Natalie her white wine, Mark his Jack Daniels and 7-Up, what a waste of good liquor, and Emma the orange juice she wanted because of her pregnancy, and took what appeared to be my gin and tonic over to the chair sitting by the TV. I needed to sitting on the hassock with my legs wide and resting on them, and my hands hanging down between my knees, holding my drink. I gazed around at each of them before finally staring at Natalie. So, Natalie, what was in it for you? I don't quite understand, I inquired. She looked bewildered and questioned, what was that, Alex? What exactly are you talking about? Last night, girl, I said. Why did you work so hard to put it up? Just as I finished speaking, Mark sputtered and coughed on the drink he had just consumed. I stared at him. Mark, I get what you got out of it, but was that all? It seems like there must be more. I attempted to stare at both ladies simultaneously, swinging my gaze back and forth. Mark, I know you're a playboy. One more notch doesn't seem worth it, especially given what I believe you were risking. Why, Mark? Alex, what are you saying? He stumbled out. Well, fellas, I was home last night. TechVision was cancelled, and I was in the garage when you scheduled your meeting with Emma. And as you go in the door, let me show you something. I turned on the TV beside me, and the image that appeared was live from the camera in the spare room. I had just finished hooking this up when you came over last night, Mark. Pretty good picture, isn't it? Emma hid her face in her hands, and Mark's face became pale. Natalie gave me a small sultry grin. So, guys, what was this all about? I said. Natalie crossed her legs, and one foot started bouncing up and down slightly. What do you think it meant, Alex? She inquired. Well, Natalie, you replied, you know you have a bit of a reputation too. Actually, it goes along with Mark's. You folks have been pretty straight with us, but I've had a couple of comments at TechVision. I was pretty glad you folks hadn't said anything to us, but I'm guessing that's about to change right now, right, Natalie? Well, this wasn't exactly the way we wanted to bring it up, but yeah, I think you may be right, she said. I glanced across at my perplexed wife. Emma, up to now I thought you were aware of this. Now I'm not so sure. Your friend and her husband, Mark here, have been in a kind of key club the past couple of years. I don't know how often, but every once in a while, a group of them gets together on a Friday night. They meet in a back room at Mason's Bistro for dinner, and every couple brings one of their house keys hanging on a tag with their address on it. As they come in the back room at Benny's, they drop the key in a big barrel. It's kind of like the one you see at bingo games. After a nice dinner, and since the husbands and wives have driven separately, the wives all leave and drive to their own homes. The gals get home and get ready for some action, something with a guy they aren't used to and who can probably get them off better than the same old meat they have at home every night. After they've gone, the guys get a draw out of the key barrel. As I understand the rules, each guy gets to look at the address, and if it's his own address, he holds it in his left hand and pulls out another key, then drops his wife's key back into the barrel. I understand some guys will check out an address, and if it's with some gal they had sex with recently or one they don't like for whatever reason, they will draw another key, but they can only draw twice. If they pull their wife's key the second time, they're out of luck. And I understand some guys have really gotten in the soup for showing up to bonk their own wife when she was expecting action. Anyway, then the guys all have a drink before heading off to their rendezvous for the weekend. Yeah, honey, it's for the whole weekend, not just a couple hours or a night. I've had a couple of comments from some of the guys wondering when I was going to join, since we were so close with Natalie and Mark. Everyone involved with the Key Club thought we were swapping with them on the side. A lot of the other guys wanted to get into your pants. It wasn't just Mark here. The room was quite quiet, and I examined each of my friends attentively. Emma was gazing at me, obviously stunned and horrified by what I had just told her. Her eyes were enormous. Natalie was giving me a little simpering grin, and her foot was bouncing much harder. Mark seemed proud and satisfied after hearing my description. Honey, I said, gazing at Emma again before we went any farther, I think you should know something about your last night's lover. Emma's face turned white again at my description. She definitely did not want to be reminded of how shaky our marriage was at the time. As you saw last night, Mark is well known in this area. Emma's face became crimson red, and she hid her face in her hands while gazing across at Mark. That smug expression was constant, as was one of the largest smiles I'd ever seen. He gave me a condescending look, but I believed I'd get rid of it before the night ended. Mark is the prize at these drawings. I understand all the wives hold their breath, waiting to see if they have drawn the real blue-blooded stud for the weekend, I told them. Just like you described for the co-eds in your college, I said, looking at everyone's face one more time, I added, so, you see, Emma, you've already tasted the best. Mark smirked at me, and when I glanced at Natalie, she smirked at Emma. Emma simply appeared to drop into her chair, gazing at me sadly. I sat back on the hassock and took a long sip of my tonic. Pretty harsh, but that's how my tongue tasted anyhow. Then I sat and let the stillness grow. Mark still seemed pleased with himself, but Natalie seemed to want to say something. I simply stayed silent and let the tension rise even more. Alex, Natalie has at last begun, it's a pretty good deal, and all we do is add a bit of spice to the marriage. After all, we all get stale and tired of one another after a while. All we do is add some spice and keep the love and the marriage going. Ask Loverman here, he hasn't lost any of me he wants. And I think we've added some real nice variations to our lives this way. Isn't that right, Mark? Mark simply gave a dumb smile. Natalie kept going anyway, we just thought to show you two that loosening up a bit wouldn't break you up. Just the contrary, it'll give you each a boost, and actually, I'm pretty sure it will make you closer. Your friendship wouldn't be touched, and I know each of you can use a few new ideas to use in the old bedroom. No pressures on you folks, just think about it. We'll both be here when you make up your minds. This was the introduction, and in a sense, the confession I had been waiting for. Well, Natalie, I appreciate your patience with me. I haven't talked this over with Emma, and I doubt I will. I'm not really interested in swapping, or, as I was telling Emma this evening, in another partner for sex. My wife and I are intelligent, well-read, and imaginative people, and we don't need to dip wicks and pull trains to improve our sex life. I think we'll enjoy that life together for many more years, God. The final thing I feel I need to say disturbs me because it seems like I'm punishing Emma. That is not it, Emma, but as you have said multiple times today, Mark does not engage in safe sex. I have no clue what the medical conditions of his numerous sex partners are, and he doesn't seem to care. What I do know is that you are now carrying our kid. You will need to contact your doctor and tell him why you believe you should be tested for STDs. This will damage both of us. We can't have sex until we've had you tested and proven negative. We cannot transfer anything back and forth between us. Do you understand? Looking across to our old pals, I said, and, Natalie, I feel betrayed by both of you. I'm not sure which of you irritates me more, but in any event, we'll have to cancel our plans for the foreseeable future. I turned off the TV and handed Emma the USB drive. Emma grabbed today's newspaper, which was sitting unopened on an end table, wadded up a few sheets, placed them in the fireplace, and lit a match to them. After adding the drive to the pile, she and I stood and watched the fire, mouthing, and then burning that thing, with Emma feeding more paper to the fire until only black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. When I turned around, both Mark and Nat, well, the chemical works, I said quietly to myself. I made a phone call. Hey, Martinez, your package is ready. 3 hours later, at 10:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I answered up and greeted Martinez. Do you have something for me? He asked. I pointed to the 2 limp corpses in my room. Martinez returned with 7 more men, grabbed up Natalie, and as they approached Mark, I ordered them to halt. I ran upstairs and came down with a baseball bat, which I only needed for a few strokes. Martinez laughed and placed Mark on the ground. I knew exactly where I wanted to strike the kneecaps, the ankles, and the 2 family jewels, all in a few quick movements. Emma stood there, jaw gaping. I wish he were awake. I wanted to hear the screams, I said. He's all yours, Martinez stated as they grabbed up Mark and led him out. Martinez entered after 5 minutes and sat beside me. Thanks for the samples, we needed them. My pleasure, I said. Emma was still sitting with her mouth wide after Martinez departed. The night was chilly, and Emma approached me and said, What happens to them? They are heading to Mexico, I said, where we have some youngsters studying medicine. They need some examples to practice with. My voice sounded cold and flat. What if someone is searching for them? She asked. Martinez will take care of that. Did you kill them? How could you be so heartless? She whispered. You broke my heart and did not care what I would feel, she continued, her voice quivering. You have no right to judge me. If you think you can walk to the cops and sell me out, please try your luck, I told them. As per my understanding, I just ensured that they are useful to society. Emma was now trembling. You said we'd come back and could have sex. Well, I lied, my darling. Hey Race, what will happen? Well, get the unborn child's DNA tested tomorrow morning. Well, wait for the outcomes. If the findings indicate that I am the father, I will assist with the delivery. However, we will not stay married. You will not take a lover till my kid is 10 years old. If you do, I promise to make you extremely helpful. Emma nodded and continued, I didn't know you were like this. I went away and said, neither did I. We filed for divorce the next day. 3 weeks later, we received the DNA report, and we were divorced for months. My son was born 2 months later, and I spent a lot of time with him. Emma and I did meet and talk, but I could never love her again. She never took a lover, and I helped her with support for the next 5 years until my son could take care of himself. I never dated, and all my energy was focused on my son. Yes, Martinez did send me a bye. Thank you for watching. What would you have done in this situation? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.